Now the bloody hedgehog arrives. Jesus Christ.
Good evening. Welcome to the After Hours show. There we go. My name is Joe in Norway. I'll be your cook for the evening. I'm joined by Ann Lee, retired college professor and community member at the Daily Kos. She's a member of the National Council of Independent Scholars and is a contributor to the book, The Political Economy of Art, Making the Nation of Culture. Evening, Ann.
Hey there, Joe. What's for supper?
Hey. Oh, I think I need to crank up my mic a little bit. I could hear you a little better. There we go. Yes, well, this is my final Norwegian Kitchen ASMR session for the time being, anyways, at least for the next 6 to 8 months, maybe longer, not sure. I thought, what's that?
We're going to be able to do this while you're on the road?
It's going to be bumpy, so we're not sure for at least a week. That may be a no, but I'll figure out some alternative things that I'll be doing. And
you could record them in batches, so we can.
Yeah. What do they say? Bank some episodes.
Indeed.
The only issue is that I'm sans kitchen, so I won't have any kitchen to cook in. So that's the biggest problem, besides the time zone. Losing an hour and no kitchen. But we'll figure something out.
Okay.
Yeah. But so since it's the last episode in Norge, in Norway, I thought I'd do something as traditional, but also well, it's harkening back to the old days. You don't find this around very much. Tonight's show, our menu features sorbus occupari, I believe that's how you pronounce it, or mountain ash, or the European rowan. Rowan berries. It's the genus sorbus of the rose family, Rosaceae. So these little fellers, they're a bit toxic. They grow in a tree or a shrub. Here they're quite tall, kind of a hardy tree, very astringent fruit, technically a palm fruit, so it's similar to an apple. So you can cut it open. It looks like a miniature apple. So we're going to pair it with some harvested rognabar. In Norwegian, they call it rognabar or rowanberry. And we've got some apples our friends left from their garden. So I thought I'd make some rowanberry butter, apple butter.
Cool.
So these are quite hardy trees and popular. They go high as the 71st latitude, so way far north Norway. They're also up in the Himalayas, and I think they were brought to the States as well, or North America anyway. Super popular with the Vikings, you know. little mythology background on these fellers. This is from the Wikipedia. The Sami mythology, the Laps, the goddess Rovdana is the consort of the thunder god Horagales, which would be Thor in the Norwegian. So the red berries of Rowan were holy to Rovdana, and the name Rovna resembles North Germanic. I think I got John beat on this one. Ravdna. Rovna.
Rumna.
Rovna. 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 Rovna or Rugna. R-E-G-N. Norwegian. So red berries of Rowan were holy to this goddess, and the name Rovna resembles North Germanic words for the tree. For example, the Old Norse is Reinir. In Norse mythology, the goddess Sif is the wife of the thunder god Thor, who had been linked with Rovna. According to Skaldskaparmal, it's the Old Norwegian, the Rowan is called the salvation of Thor because Thor once saved himself by clinging to it. It has been hypothesized that Sif was once conceived in the form of a rowan to which Thor clung. Oh. So I don't know if John's in the house. John, if you're here, sit down. Tonight we're mixing forage fruit and experimental cooking. Oh man, forage and experiment shouldn't be in the same sentence. But trust me on this one. See, this little fruit, although it is edible, it's got loads of ascorbic acid, but unless it's gone through about 2 or 3 frosts or been thoroughly cooked, it's got parasorbic acid, which could lead to kidney failure, shit like that. So so about 2 or 3 hard frosts, and then it changes the berry so it's more edible and more easily digested, yet still remains quite bitter. So
way to give yourself the shit before you go traveling, Joe.
There you go.
So maybe mid-trip I'll be struggling with kidney failure. So so what I'm going to try to do, I've been holding off until as long as I could. I'm like, God damn it, it's gonna frost is coming. It feels like frost has been here a few times already, but because we're still quite high up in the mountains, so it's coming down close, but it hasn't quite hit. Maybe not totally. So I cleaned them all up, prepped them a bit, and threw them in the freezer. So we've got at least one hard frost. So we're not only freezing them, we're gonna cook the shit out of them as well. So I think we'll be all right here.
All right.
We just topped up our insurance policy, so it should be all right. Up in the barn here, we found the old flasks, giant glass winemaking flasks. So these used to be made into schnapps or ale in the old days. Before the modern era, hops were not really used a lot because there was a lot of fear about them being poisonous or not healthy. So a lot of people would use heather, or in Norway they would use juniper berries or rognabar. Some of these mixtures they would use would create a somewhat hallucinogenic kind of alcoholic beverages.
Cool.
So yeah, a lot of alternative uses for these. So We're gonna make apple butter. I've got the pressure cooker. I got some already sterilized glasses. I'll probably sterilize them once more before we fill them. I'm gonna do it in the pressure cooker. Well, you use just a little bit of oil. This is where the experiment comes in. I hope the pressure as it builds up and the amount of water I have will generate enough moisture to release the water in the apples and whatever's in the berries. The berries are quite dry without burning the shit out of it. So basically, we don't want a lot of liquid. We just want to keep it kind of dry on the dry side. But in order for us to get pressure, we need moisture. It's gonna. I hope I don't screw this up, but we're gonna try it out because it'll also speed things up as well. So I'm gonna get to doing that. I'm gonna get to apple peeling. So we'll see how things go. I'll keep you abreast of the situation.
Alrighty then.
Cool.
Oh man. Okay, it's been a busy week. Donald Trump got himself into more trouble in a variety of ways. Went to the Economic Club in New York and laid out a bunch of gibberish about, well, I mean, he said, he indulges in tautologies. Childcare is childcare. Essentially, they asked him some, it was sort of a panel, and they asked him some technical, some policy questions, and he didn't do a very good job of explaining stuff. It was just hemming and hawing. And on the childcare issue, apparently, he's going to pay for it all with tariffs on the Chinese, which sounds a lot like Mexicans paying for the wall. So pretty much it's the same deal. And the whole model for tariffs, and I put up something on it, is a real problem. He still doesn't know how tariffs operate. Still doesn't understand that it functions kind of as a tax as a domestic tax. So because of the price of tariffs is going to be shifted back onto the American consumer, so prices will go up, and in the short term, we're going to have a lot of issues. Let's just put it that way. Inflationary price stuff if Trump goes into office. So on the other hand, maybe we'll all be happy with Elon Musk making the federal government more efficient, which is ironic, of course, since a significant amount of his own activity is subsidized by federal money. But anyway, that aside, it's pretty clear that things are happening. I mean, aside from the documents trial being sort of dismissed, but one thinks it will come back on appeal from the 11th Circuit. Things have happened. The sentencing that was scheduled for a week or two, a couple weeks, is now shifted to after the election, which actually is probably a good idea because there probably would be a public kerfuffle. It seems that Marshawn is going to sentence him to jail time and some kind of jail time. So having that happen before the election would have been troubling because, I mean, it's not so much about the Secret Service coverage, but a whole bunch of other things. And then, needless to say, there's other stuff going on. People unhappy with J.D. Vance saying what he thinks, somewhat anachronistic. That on the one hand, I think he fully believes that there's a grouping out there who really truly believes in a very traditionalized kind of constructed family, even though most American families are quite blended and really quite not homogenous in that particular sense. But that's kind of, well, projection-wise, that's kind of what they want. Anyway, there was a shooting this week. It's one of those problematic school shootings that has a variety of other noise that goes around it. But needless to say, J.D. Vance says that it's school shootings are a fact of life, and we should just sort of get used to it. Trump has said that we have to get over it, and Kamala Harris says it doesn't really have to be that way. And I think people are leaning on that side. One example of that leaning is that Dick Cheney and his daughter Liz are both going to vote for Kamala Harris, which is, if you know kind of where they come from, it's really quite unusual. Liz Cheney voted 93% with Donald Trump when she was in Congress. And of course, we know Dick Cheney from the Iraq War and Halliburton and a variety of other things. So that's kind of where we are.
And shooting people in the face.
Oh, God. And the person who gets shot apologizes for, I guess, having his face put in front of the birdshot or something. Very weird. Needless to say, I assume people had quite a few cocktails before they went out shooting, which is never a good combination. Needless to say, shooting wise, apparently the FBI followed up on threats made by the 13-year-old shooter, Colt Gray. He's now 14 and going to be tried as an adult. There's a variety of charges. It's fairly complicated, but now that there's been this at least one precedent with the Crumleys in Michigan, where the two parents who allowed their child to get hold of a gun are serving time for involuntary manslaughter. Similarly, Colin Gray, Colt Gray's dad, 54 years old, I think, is going to be prosecuted for a second-degree murder or a variety of involuntary manslaughter. So there's the point being is that after the FBI had sort of followed up on a threat, he had this conversation with them, said, no, we're not going to let him get near any kind of rifles. This was in May, I think, and subsequently, a few months later, not May this year, but May of last year, by the time Christmas time rolled around in 2023, he had bought a AR-15 pattern rifle for his son Colt, who it appears has some issues. And so, needless to say, if you haven't heard the story, because a lot of details are still not available. How did he get on campus? Why had he planned to, or a call had come in threatening that many schools were going to have this attack occur. He shot two teachers and two students, and was cornered and gave up and wasn't shot to death, surprisingly. But anyway, so all of those things are there. He's alive, incarcerated, as is his father. There's no bail. It's interesting. So that's kind of where the week has, and it only happened a couple of days ago. Needless to say, it's Winder, Georgia, which is about 60 miles east, I think, of Atlanta. I guess it's the county. Barrow County is the next county over from Fulton. Anyway, things happen, and the reaction, of course, from it being a political campaign is, of course, surprising that J.D. Vance would just say, well, school shootings are a fact of life, and the school structures need to be hardened. That's a code for, you have a single entryway. Obviously, there would be more exits, and that was the problem in Uvalde. Some people had propped open, apparently, the locked doors, exit doors. But in this particular case, I don't know. It does appear to be a unified building with, I suppose, multiple entrances and armed school resource officers, none of whom seem to have done anything during this entire set of procedures, which is kind of what has been happening, that armed school resource officers have been there, but have done not very much relative to school safety. So that's a whole nother question. I think that we have to, as a society, perhaps need to have some conversation about what the standards are for these kinds of things. Anyway, I think everyone probably lives in a school district that has armed school resource officers. So, that's another kind of issue. Needless to say, there are other things have occurred. David Hogg gets his time on the air, and he's become much more articulate. He's a former Parkland, one of the Park kids from Parkland in Florida. So that's happened, and hasn't fully sort of expressed itself, but it has raised some interesting questions about whether there can be reasonable gun laws. In particular, in this case, in terms of Georgia, obviously there was an advance warning with the FBI inquiry about threats against schools, and there should have been a flag there. Well, you'd think there'd be a flag there, but anyway, we'll know more as it's only been a couple days, so we'll know more as that has come. Everything else seems quite peripheral. The Republicans managed to find far-flung relatives that I think Tim Walz may or may not know in Nebraska. And they organized them to wear T-shirts that said that members of the Walz family were voting for Trump. It's sort of cute, but the Walz family sort of is amazed that they had such far-flung relatives in rural Nebraska, but I guess they are there. Now, all kinds of other things have happened. On October 3rd, Tina Peters, who's from Grand Junction, Colorado, the county clerk for Mesa County, she had been arrested for trying to, and with the complicity apparently of Mike Lindell, the MyPillow guy, or she had stolen somebody's access ID and was trying to monkey with the election machines in 2020, and it seems pretty clear now that she's facing a maximum of 22 years in prison. She'll be sentenced on October 3rd, but she is probably one of the first of people, county clerk level people who have been intervening in election count activities. This is not the last, as we've seen from 2020. People running around trying to do various things at the county, at the district level in terms of voting, and there may be issues, and we'll see as November 5th approaches. So that's going on. I haven't even started on Ukraine yet. There's
Oh, take your time. We got plenty of time here.
Okay. I mean, aside from, it's interesting that we've had a variety of developments. RFK Jr. Joining or endorsing the Trump campaign, and certain promises about cabinet posts for people. RFK Jr. is on the transition team, assuming that obviously Trump wins. Promises seem to have been sort of waved at anyway, and so it would be a little scary to have RFK Jr. as the health and Human Services cabinet director, secretary, but that could happen and would be quite frightening considering his position on vaccines and mask mandates and all that other jazz. So that's been happening. They've really been searching for kind of weird stuff. The fact that Kamala Harris, when she's listening to, her her smartphone to probably just listen to music or whatever. She uses wired earbuds. She doesn't use Bluetooth type earbuds. So the Republicans have said this is a plot of some kind to avoid talking to the press. But the reality is, of course, that wired earbuds are more secure because of the hackability of Bluetooth connections. So, it's just you're trying to make something out of nothing.
Speed and the quality as well.
Indeed, and
latency.
It's just it is amazing that they're trying to make a thing of it, that she was doing it in order to avoid talking to the press. There is a kind of framing that is going on that presumes certain types of things that have a tinge of misogyny. And on that same note, from a misogyny kind of framing, today Trump had was speaking. He did all kinds of stupid things. Today, I think he was talking to a police a convention of some kind. So he sort of tried to do a lot of shtick, and it wasn't going very well. But some of the shtick has to do with mainly commenting on women. He did another thing today where he had his lawyers out there and was commenting on. For no apparent reason, how many people he's been trying to reduce or eliminate on appeal the civil suit that forces him to pay $83.3 million to E. Jean Carroll. And so today he just cranked out all kinds of weird lies that the original picture from, I don't know, the 1960s or 70s, somewhere where that showed that she had actually met Trump. She was not totally random, was artificially AI generated, which it's not, but stuff is just getting thrown out there. So there's a lot of noise, plenty of noise. And then he made some sexist comment about, in terms of other women who have made charges about Trump's sexual abuse, that they weren't attractive enough or something or other, implying that they were just not his type, which is a comment that he's made before. So he has essentially been recycling a lot of old memes, old tropes. And I mean, it still stings. But he said enough today in attacking E. Jean Carroll specifically so that E. Jean could sue him again and get even more money. So this could be a kind of cottage industry or a profit center. I mean, he just and of course with the two lawyers behind him, he made some comment about how terrible his legal representation was. And so that was also pretty funny, is to insult your lawyers and while they're right in front of you, which may, I suppose, be some solace.
Real class act.
It's just there's a lot of pasta being flown around. It's flung around. See whether something's going to stick. Trump made the statement that I'd like to think that God thinks that I'm going to straighten out our country. The sort of God on my side thing. And I mean, he has said all kinds of random things that I think they just can't remember that he said it. So there's that.
If I could interject there, I got a question for James Carraway. I always feel guilty about, putting so much goddamn sugar, refined sugar, no doubt.
Yeah.
Making apple butter. Normally, what's popular here with the rowanberry is to make jelly out of it, which use a metric ton of sugar.
Right.
to cut the astringency. But in order to store this, right, you need a
Yeah.
certain amount of sugar.
That's right.
I'm not. So I could either risk. Am I going to risk my health by using sugar, or risk my death by not putting enough sugar in? So I got the apples in there. So if I was putting this in the freezer, so if you want to do this, if you've got a Rogn, maybe you don't have a Rognabad up there, but if you were going to do it and cut it with apples, you could do it by not adding any extra sugar, just using apple and rowan berries, and then put it in the freezer. So
Yeah, I'm wrestling with the same
frozen
problem.
down.
I've got a bunch of really small, really nice sweet grapes,
Yeah,
and
mention that.
I want to cook them down and turn them into jelly. But if I do that, I'm going to have to put in a metric ton of sugar, as you say, or freeze them. If you're freezing them, you don't need to add any sugar. Lemon juice helps, I think, to some extent, but I'm not sure. I would read up on it and find out what the proper ratio is, and you might need to measure the pH of it with some litmus paper or a pH meter or something.
Yep.
But I'm not sure. Keep me posted.
Well, if you don't hear it from me, you'll know what it might have been.
One of those experiments.
All right, we'll just
Nancy has a question. Nancy?
Yeah.
Well, I don't have a question, but there are some preserves or fruit things that are made where grape juice is the sweetener. Grapes have a tremendous, I mean, obviously it can vary, but white grapes have a lot of sugar content. So
a lot of juices are cut with grape juice.
Yeah.
So you don't need to add refined sugar. Of course, if you're using grape, you would have to cook it down, but it has a very high sugar content. In fact, sometimes if you have grape juice just straight, it tastes like sugar water. So I don't think if you use grape juice, I don't think you have to necessarily add any refined sugar.
What if you just used the grapes themselves without anything else?
Well, I would think it would have enough sugar.
The issue is the pectin.
You would have to boil it so that you get the moisture content right. So I never did it. I would look for a recipe, but I feel fairly certain you don't need to add sugar.
Cool. Well, Joe and Nancy, I'll research it a little bit and see what is recommended and try to get back with you.
Okay.
Dope.
Well, pressure. We got the 5 minutes under pressure. That should be enough to at least cook them sufficiently. Now we're just gonna reduce. We'll add the sugar now and then reduce it. I also added ginger, so it'll be a little spicy, bitter, spicy, and somewhat sweet. I'm just gonna do the quick release. So I'm gonna run cold water over this to get the pressure off first. Be right back.
Okie dokie. Vamp tool ready. Last month, the Russians launched 160 missiles, 780 glide bombs, and 400 strike drones. No, actually, they did that in a week. That was a week's worth of throwing stuff at the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are making a little bit of progress in Kursk, in the Kursk Oblast. There are a variety of arguments going on. The Ukrainian government is having the cabinet is being reorganized. Some folks are being removed, new cabinet officers being put in. There's some other underlying political issues going on, needless to say. So that's happening. Missiles and drones all over the place in some places that haven't yet been sort of hit regularly, and needless to say, attacks on civilian targets like schools. Well, there's a military academy that got hit this week. People, yes, the casualty rates are pretty much the same as they've always been, and the ratios tend to be still the same. That is, that the Ukrainians just simply for training or whatever are simply don't have as high a rate of casualties, whether folks are being killed or maimed or injured, and everything else is a variety of strange episodes with drones. Some other people really indulge themselves with. I try not to do it because it's very unsettling to see people being blown up. It's, it's not live, but it is, you see videos of people being blown up by first person view drones. Essentially, people are being hit with the equivalent of a rocket propelled grenade. And so
The faces of death every day.
oh, it's people, every day the Russians are coming up with somewhere around 1,000 plus 1,300 is, I think, the high number of casualties every day. The big picture is, of course, there are large scale cruise missiles being sent at targets. Kyiv is getting more missiles thrown at it. As we talked about last week, the advantage of sending up F-16s now that the Ukrainians have F-16s, then they're trying to shoot down Russian cruise missiles. I'm not sure how successful they've been. A significant number of the Iranian-designed drones, Sahid, I think is how it's pronounced, manufactured in Russia, but they're Iranian-designed. They send, anywhere between 50 to 100 or 20 to 50 drones every night. These are very slow-moving drones with a kind of fairly primitive two-cylinder engine. So they move fairly slowly, so they can be brought down with anti-aircraft machine gun fire. But there's not a lot of details, of course, about how these things are happening. The long-range drone program for the Ukrainians is actually doing quite well. They're now targeting infrastructure that is not only oil depots and refineries, but they're now beginning to attack electrical plants and things on the grid. I think there was a pipeline attack. So things that weren't really targeted much before are now being targeted now. It's unclear how that it's going to, whether it is or isn't going to affect the Russians. As the cold weather comes, I think we'll see some more of this. There have been very long strikes at very far away targets. The Ukrainians use a kind of a drone that appears to be a miniature single engine civilian airplane. It's a single monowing plane. Looks like a Cessna or Piper Cub, but slightly smaller. And the darn things, they travel quite a ways. We're talking 1,000 kilometers into Russia. So that's happening. There have been internal sabotage activities. In the case of the current combat area, the front line of the combat area, there has been some severing, as we were talking before, about the rail lines that sort of parallel in there. It's just unclear whether there's going to be a really large offensive that's going to come through. Apparently, the idea of staying in Kursk, that is staying in Russia, the Ukrainians have made an incursion into Russia. President Zelensky implied that they were going to stick it out. It's not just simply that they were going to attack and then withdraw. I think they're going to try and hold on to the a land that's about 1,000 square kilometers of land, of Russian land that they hold now. Whether they're really going to be able to hold it is another question, but because the Russians have not fully devoted enough military force to try and push the Ukrainians back. So it's just unusual. But on the other hand, some analysts say it's just normal for the Russians. Russians just don't move fast enough on these matters. Excuse me. So that's the current state. There's far too much speculation about what Putin does or doesn't believe. It's pretty clear that overall, the Russian population is okay with this, with whatever they're doing in Ukraine, however you describe it, whether it's a special military operation or an invasion. It's clearly an invasion. There are Russians on Ukrainian soil. Pushing them back to whatever pre-2014 borders is not out of the question. It's just it's unclear whether how it's going to happen. They have about 4 or 5 different options of how they can actually do this, but it's going to take a lot of tech, a lot of support. But those things are being transferred. I think there was another Patriot missile battery that has been transferred from I don't know, it's Romania or somebody who has a Patriot missile battery. So it's a complex. It comes with radar and a bunch of missiles and stuff. Another one has been transferred to the Ukrainians, as well as vehicles of all kinds, infantry fighting vehicles, armored personnel carriers have been transferred. The tank issue is out of the 31 Abrams tanks that were transferred to the Ukrainians, 31 of them, there's 15 left. So I don't know, you want to think of it as not so much a failure, but it is a little disappointing that they're vulnerable to some types of anti-tank rockets. So, and this is also a drone deal. And it's unfortunate that we're now seeing all kinds of different cope cages, that is a kind of wire structures of one kind or another that protect the tanks. And of course, we went through many weeks of little examples of how they built literally a small building around Russian tanks so that you had this big box rolling around to stop drone attacks, which doesn't really work. Well, and also if it manages to get in underneath the sort of roof that you built, a solid kind of box that you built over the turret, it actually traps the crew inside. So it's whatever kludge is going on right now, it's not working real well. And but the fact is, I think even if there are Abrams tanks, you actually still have to build these kind of cope cage things around it to resist the fairly large proliferation of drones that are being used. The predominant Russian one is called the Lancet. It's a loitering munition, I think, and it's been fairly effective in terms of taking out Ukrainian vehicles. Now, the Ukrainians have a really wide range of drones, some that are home built, and they have a fairly large home built industry now. In fact, it is the claim that every drone that's out there being used by the Ukrainian army has actually been produced one way or another in Ukraine. So that's from a homegrown industry, that's an important thing. On the other hand, the Ukrainians are now building a ballistic missile. If you'll recall, the Ukrainians, there were nukes, nuclear, the Soviets had a significant amount of intercontinental ballistic missile sites and facilities in Ukraine. And in 1994, they were given back or dismantled. And what is the Budapest agreement The fact is, there's a lot of underlying missile infrastructure in Ukraine. It's a significantly industrialized country, so a lot of things are being built. That's the kind of expectation, I think, in the post-war period, whenever post-war happens. The larger picture, of course, I think, is if the Ukrainians hold on to Kursk, the land they've seized from the Russians, they could use that as leverage to try and get the Russians to move out of Donetsk and the Donbass. But that remains to be seen. It is still a question of whether the world, all of the larger powers, can work this out from a diplomatic kind of way. Otherwise, it's turning out to be a very large, not so much a boondoggle, but you can see that it's military Keynesianism. That is, people are propping up certain elements of the economies because even though they're transferring one generation of military technology to the Ukrainians, they're all going to be replaced by new generations of military technology. For every F-16, or in the case of Czechia, I think is going to transfer more MiG-29s that's from the Soviet era to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have kind of two layers of several layers actually of jet technology at work. That is, there's a whole fleet of MiG-29s that they got from the Poles and a bunch of other folks, and so even though some of them have been shot down, there's still a fair number, but nowhere near the number that the Russians have. The Russians still are bringing stuff in, although I think they're holding in reserve all these older tanks, much older tanks. They've gone back to T-55, T-62. These are very old tanks, and they may or may not be used in the upcoming war. The thing is, it's still about training. If you're going to use older tanks, you still have to have crews for them, and there's a whole bunch of other training issues that probably go on there. And in the midst of all this, you've got other infrastructure that's being destroyed. So there's that. And then the underlying point, of course, is that the areas that the Russians now occupy, they're trying to convert or sort of propagandize into becoming parts of Russia. So, the school year has started, and so, schools in the occupied areas are not being taught in Ukrainian, but in Russian. So there's that. And needless to say, school started, and the Russians sent missiles. So things like that have happened. Civilian deaths have occurred in bunches in various ways. The hitting of occupied residencies, etc. They're big enough targets so that it doesn't really require precision to hit it. So we're looking at weeks more of this same kind of activity until the snow season starts, which is not that far away. So we're going to see these little lags in the war, and probably continuing aerial attack. There was a significant attack this past week of Moscow itself. Then it's unclear because no one wants to really fess up, but a significant number, probably the biggest number ever, of some kind of drones, etc., were sent at Moscow. Most of them, the claim was that the Russians shot most of them down, but it's, you've got a lot of information issues that go on in it. But I think the Russians are kind of aware that the Ukrainians are not giving up and are sending a lot of stuff at the Russian capital. And the peripheral areas are becoming involved. The Belarusians have shot down stray drones that, so when the attack starts, a couple of them just sort of lose their way and have wound up flying into Poland or Belarus or whatever. And in one case this past week, the Belarusians had to send up a fighter plane to knock down a wayward Russian drone. So that's happening. It's a busy time, and against that you have other side issues. There's issues with the Turks. There's stuff happening in a lot of different places. Serbians have their well anyway. We'll see where the Serbians are in a couple of probably a couple of weeks, where that's going. There's some other issues trundling around in the background. Needless to say, training still is going on. The Brits are still training Ukrainians. There is training going on in Romania. After losing one pilot and one F-16 last week, nothing else has been shot down. So whatever number, which I think is close to 90, maybe 80 F-16s are all, they're still there. They haven't really lost anything yet. I think they're still figuring out the kind of doctrine they want to use for air defense, because it is this idea that they're not going to go, these F-16s are not going to, in fact, no Ukrainian fighter plane has violated Russian airspace during the entire war. So if the Ukrainians are going to stop these very large Tu-95 bombers from launching cruise missiles, they're going to have to stand off a bit, and we'll see whether the kinds of missiles that have been discussed are really going to be used, the kind that have additional electronic warfare protection. They have stealth capability. There's some models of stealth missiles that have been provided to the Ukrainians, and whether they're going to be used not simply to get ground targets, but to actually take out, there's a version of a weapon that they can use against. It would be a significant propaganda victory to take down a large Tu-95 bomber. Each bomber can launch up to, I think, 8 or cruise missiles, and they've been responsible for the bulk of missile launches. That doesn't mean to say that other platforms aren't being used. There are several cruise missiles have been launched from the several Russian diesel subs that are still in the Black Sea, although it's fairly clear that they try not to allow them to be revealed in any way, lest the Ukrainians start really. The Ukrainians don't have an anti-submarine warfare capability, but it may be something that they've been building on. There have been very few marine, that is, boat drones. For some reason that hasn't been discussed very much, but that just may simply be that they're waiting to figure out targets at all. There have been fewer attacks by the Ukrainians on the air defense in Crimea, but we'll see. It's fairly clear that the Ukrainians are not being they're no slouches in terms of target acquisition. They seem to be very clear about what they want to do in terms of the range issues. And there is a political issue that they want the Americans specifically to release the restraints on using the slightly, it's an intermediate missile, the ATACMS, on Russian soil, and that hasn't quite happened yet. And there's a kind of gray area whether you can or can't use them within sort of a buffer zone between Russia and Ukraine. So that's a kind of issue. And the reason why that's important is because these are highly accurate weapons and can be used to take out very significant targets, which they have so far. Some fairly important targets have been hit with these weapons. These are a later generation of the, but can be launched from the same launchers as the MRLS, I think, missile. I know this is overly technical, but much of what goes on every day is a series of lots of little attacks that are largely technological, and not as many artillery barrages, probably because of the ammunition issue, but also because I think it's a kind of doctrine thing relative to supporting the kind of displacement or application of troops. So that's happening. And let's see, what else? We talked about the government being slightly revised.
Before you move on, I was wondering, have the Ukrainians engaged the Russian jets with their F-16?
No, this has not yet happened. There has been no. I mean, they're mainly the F-16s anyway, but even the Su-29s or whatever the hell it is, the MiG-29s, they're mainly being used to try to suppress air defense. There's no kind of dogfighting really going on. In other words, the Russians will send up a fighter plane or a fighter bomber with stuff and launch from on the other side of the Russian border. The Ukrainians will not confront them. They just don't. And part of the reason is that the Ukrainian inventory has older versions of the same jet that doesn't have the same kind of, electronics, technology as the Russian ones. So they're at a disadvantage. I think it would be, they might more easily be shot down. Whereas if they suddenly decide to replace them with F-16s and are given sort of the go-ahead to occasionally go over the border, I think we'll see the F-16s sort of kill all of the Russian jets because they are superior. They have better equipment, more advanced electronics. The electronic warfare stuff is better. They have some sort of sensor that allows them to have a much wider coverage of. It's a radar that's mounted on the weapons pod. It allows to sort of see better what's around you. So that's happening. I know it sounds all very technical, but in some ways the technical stuff has been what slowed the lack of technical stuff slowed down the Ukrainians this past year. That is lack of artillery shells and stuff, and they got pushed back in certain areas. There's an area in the Donetsk where the Russians have kind of moved up about maybe a couple of kilometers, but it looks bigger on the map, but it's really, and it is, they have an important objective in mind, but they're moving really slowly. And, it's kind of unclear what's going to happen down there. It's all very slow. And yet 1,000+ people are being injured every day. So anyway, that's the war. Been some confrontations in the South China Sea between the Philippines and the Chinese. It's a kind of standoff between, as I understand it, the Philippine Coast Guard is protecting a small area. It's not, I don't even know if it's an atoll or it's just a ship. And they're sort of protecting this one little thing out there, and the Chinese Coast Guard is down there messing with it all the time. So there's been this, back and forth about it. It's really pretty much going to go nowhere unless they start firing at each other, which they haven't yet done. Instead, they've been using water cannons on each other, which is, kind of stupid, but they do it. And it's not so much the territorial issue, but it is just simply to harass each other. And I suppose it's good training on the one hand. On the other hand, it's just sort of a large waste of time. But that's been happening. Let's see. There were military exercises, still a second round of military exercise. There were a couple of violations of sovereignty areas. It's all stupid. It's just a continuing effort, and it's not going to break out into any real war. So that's going on. And other things that haven't been really reported on too much that are actually kind of important in a big way. And that is there's a tanker that got hit by Houthi missiles, I think in the Red Sea, or in the Straits of Hormuz. I can't remember, but it's on fire, and they were trying to get it out of the way because it hasn't reached the point where it's going to spill its oil, whatever fuel a cargo it has. But this is as close as we're getting to a natural environmental disaster, particularly in some important sensitive areas. I guess at some moment, if the Houthis launch enough missiles, they're going to hit something, and they have. So that's kind of what's going on down there. Not much else has been, and I mean, there's political stuff going on presently. I think Sudan, there's a problem in Sudan. There's it's just awesomely terrible. So how's it going, Joe? Looked like everything
We're all finished here. I'm just trying to lay it out here for us.
Yeah, looks like we're close to the end of our little exercise here. Oh, Jim Carraway has a comment. James?
Yes, I did a little research, and it appears that to make grape jelly, you want to use red grapes because white and green grapes are not sweet enough. So you use Concord grapes or some red grapes, and you put them in the bottom of a big pan and mash them with a potato masher first. Then you cover them up with just enough water to cover them, and you cook them for 10 minutes at a rolling boil or whatever. And with the thing about the sugar, apparently there's a type of pectin called no or low sugar pectin that's easily available. So if you want to try, I think I might try this red jelly I'm trying to make with low or no sugar pectin, and maybe not add any. But they say taste it and see if it's too bitter, too sour, you add some sugar, and if it's good, just don't add any. These people that were coaching me here online about this said they add a little sugar, even with the no or low sugar pectin, but that's their choice. So that's what you do. Is you cook it, and then you add the pectin and sugar in last after you've cooked the grapes down. You strain them through a cheesecloth overnight into a pan beneath it, after you've smashed and cooked the hell out of these things. And then you can freeze it for a couple months, even if you didn't have pectin in it. But the way to test the thickness of it as you're working on it, you take a cold spoon and you fill it half full of your mixture, and you let it cool down, and then you turn the spoon on its side and see how runny the stuff is. And if it's not jelly enough, you're going to have to add more pectin, I suppose would be the thing to do. But that's one thing. They said you can also make it out of just straight grape juice, would be Concord grape juice, I guess. And
the
add
other
pectin
technique,
to that. Yeah, that would be jelly.
Another technique with the test is to throw a plate like this into the freezer with a spoon, and then spoon some out, throw it in the freezer for 30 seconds or something, and then take it out and see how the gel is.
Okay. Well, the plot thickens.
It's a quicker test.
Yeah. Oh, it is quick. That is quick. Okay, so that's so far what I've learned, and then I'll tell you how this stuff works out. I've got to go to the store and get some pectin, apparently. But I don't have any around. Yeah. Okay.
Alrighty.
There you go.
Harsh, what are we going to see in half an hour?
Oh, yeah, we're gonna see something about Bangladesh revolution actually. So last month there was a major change that happened, like the government sort of a dictator. She had to leave her place, and there was a big student revolution, so they took over the nation, and now there is an economist, Nobel Prize economist, I believe. He's the new prime minister.
Yes. Yes.
Eunice.
Yeah.
What's a sort of dictator?
Well, there were elections and she won by 90% plus, I think, votes. So, and she jailed all her opponents, yeah, it was fun. But the question I have is, Professor Ann, is there any ceasefire discussion happening between Ukraine and Russia by any chance?
Any discussion? You mean ceasefire discussions? Technically, there is,
Negotiations.
but I think they're constantly talking. It's just that it's nothing fruitful. In fact, just before there was going to be a discussion just before this Kursk incursion, and then it stopped. There was actually a ceasefire discussion going on, but then the Ukrainians decided they'd attack Russia.
Yeah, because I remember I heard about that in like few places that Putin was ready for that, but he had some demands, I guess.
There's some word that these discussions are occurring somewhere else, like in Qatar or someplace. They're not occurring anywhere near Russia or Ukraine. They're occurring somewhere else, and that's just the way I think conversations are occurring, but whether they're full-fledged negotiations, I don't know. And of course, in the U.S. case, Anthony Blinken just sort of indicated that he's probably not going to be Secretary of State after if Harris wins.
Okay,
That's a good sign.
That's what I want to ask. Like, let's say if Harris comes in, do you see any progress on this, or will they keep on selling weapons?
No, it still got screwed again. The Israelis, speaking of Israelis in Gaza, I think Israel just nixed it again. It's just seems endless, and it's sad, so sad. There's just a variety of problems. Some related to the border between Egypt and Gaza, and then this other West Bank stuff, and somebody got killed. An American activist got killed yesterday or today on up in the West Bank, and it wasn't, I think, related to IDF, but rather, these yahoos who militias, I would probably call them in the West Bank. There's just it's so terrible. And yet there's constant discussion going on. It's not like no one, is talking. It's just that every time you get close to something, some other stupid thing happens. And it is, but that's sort of the nature of this type of diplomacy. It's unfortunate, but that's what it is. And, it's been like this for decades. It gets out of hand, and then they have more discussions, and it gets out of hand again. And, it's just sad.
I would beg to differ. In terms of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, this has been a U.S.-Israel concerted effort to avoid engagement with a solution to the issue.
All right. Well,
right?
That's another way to look. Yes, I agree with you completely.
Oslo Accords were just the blueprint for apartheid.
Yes, no disagreement there.
And every action they've performed in Gaza is towards extermination of the native population.
Indeed.
In one way or another. And
Indeed.
It doesn't seem they haven't had even a slap on the wrist from the U.S. So it's kind of like they got free reign to do it until.
Well, I think that'll be the test of the difference between the Biden and the Harris administrations, because I think Harris is more predisposed to suspending aid or arms transfers. So
let's hope so.
I hope so too. But as I said, Blinken will not be the Secretary of State, so this means, there's a different slate of apologies or of diplomacy. So
What
I
they're
think they might-
banking on is the collapse of Netanyahu's regime.
well,
And then
yes,
to get basically a Netanyahu light, which they can justify as, more liberal or
yes,
level-headed, but they're going to still institute the same policy.
yes, that's probably the outcome. It's unfortunate, but that's the nature of Israeli politics at the present moment, that, with the right wing having that kind of control. It's just, no.
Well, I hope to live long enough
More-
to see some form of peace prevail. But I don't know if I consume what looks to be about 5 years of Rogna apple, rowanberry apple butter. I don't know. My days might be numbered quite early.
I'd eat it sparingly, personally speaking.
Yes, we will. So yeah, it's not traditionally eaten with meats. So it's very
okay.
astringent. It's quite bitter. It's curious. The taste is, I don't know if anybody's had it before, but it reminds me of this apricot butter I used to get at the grocery store when I was a kid. Basically, slowly reduced apricots that have been cooked down to essentially a butter, and they're so glorious.
Yum.
So it's like that, just like 10 times bitter.
Oh man. All right.
So
Well, we're getting close to the end of our little activity here. We've talked about the schedule ahead tonight. Twilight Zone.
Oh, I did one more thing, Anne, before you kick in there. Just wanted to show how it grows on the branch.
Oh,
so
it
there's
hangs.
Yeah, so it comes in bunches like this every so often. You just pick them out like that.
So it's kind of a bush or a tree?
It's well, it can be a shrub, I guess, but all I've seen here in Norway are trees.
Okay. More stuff for us to learn.
They're beautiful. They're all over the place.
Nature's bounty.
Bitter bout.
In half an hour, there won't be Twilight Zone this week, but we're going to hear about Bangladesh, and actually quite interesting and a very, unfortunately, a hot spot in the world. After that, we're going to have a preliminary that Bruce is going to do on The Prisoner, and then another episode of The Prisoner after that tonight. That's what's ahead for this evening.
Now, were we going to start early like last week?
It depends how long Harsh is going to go.
Okay.
I think I don't know if Bruce is here. Whether we're going to go for 30 more than 30 minutes. Bruce, do you have a sense of how long?
I'm here. I'm just going to read an article. It won't take long.
Okay.
Less than 30 minutes.
All right. So I don't know if you want to do that at 10:30 or 9:30. That is 6:30 or 7:30 your time. Oh, no, that's right. You're in Wisconsin.
Central now, so I have
Central. So it would be
I have a hard time staying awake, prisoner.
9:30 or 8:30 or whatever.
Yeah, whatever's good. Yeah.
I suppose we can play it by ear. We'll do Prisoner at the top of the whatever hour, whether it's going to be 10 or 11. It doesn't matter to me, but I know that some people just want to get some sleep. So
Yeah, so I'll just pick it up after Harsh.
okie doke. And then we'll send a couple of folks notes on whether we're going to change times. Okay, we're close to ending. Needless to say, there are other questions? We're going to try and do better next week. Twilight Zone is coming back. Star Trek is coming and other stuff. So see you next week.
Bye, y'all.
Wow.